of offices and clinics as places of productivity. But when the sun goes down and the cleaning crews leave, these glass towers become hollow labyrinths. Tonight we follow 3 women who learned that being alone is a luxury they no longer have. They say that silence has a sound. In the city, you never truly hear it. There's always the distant hum of a transformer, the ghostly whistle of a far-off train, or the rhythmic pulse of traffic. But out here, at the Obsidian Arch, silence is a physical weight. It's a heavy, cold blanket that wraps around your lungs and makes every heartbeat sound like a drum in an empty cathedral. My name is Maya. I've been in private security for 6 years. I've seen it all: drunk teenagers trying to tag warehouses, disgruntled ex-employees making scenes in lobbies, even the occasional confused deer breaking a window. I thought I was desensitized. I thought I was untouchable. Then came the overtime shift that changed how I look at the dark forever. The Obsidian Arch isn't a place you find on a tourist map. It's a brutalist slab of gray concrete and reinforced steel, tucked 40 miles deep into the Cascades, surrounded by a forest so thick the sunlight barely hits the forest floor even at noon. It's a government-leased research facility. What they research, I don't know. My job wasn't to ask questions. My job was to make sure the 10-foot-high electric fence stayed powered and the heavy steel door stayed locked. It was 1:45 a.m. The storm had been brewing since dusk, and now it was finally screaming. Rain lashed against the reinforced glass of the security kiosk, sounding like 1,000 tiny fingernails scratching to get in. I was sitting in the glow of 16 monitors, the only light in a room that smelled of ozone and stale coffee. I was playing a game on my old handheld console, anything to keep the night blindness at bay. When you stare at black and white security feeds for too long, your mind starts to play tricks. You see shapes in the static, you see faces in the shadows of the trees. I remember leaning back, stretching my stiff neck, and glancing at monitor 4. That camera covered the north perimeter, a stretch of fence that bordered a particularly steep drop-off into the ravine. Usually it's just blackness and the occasional sway of a pine branch. But tonight the lightning was providing a strobe light effect. Flash. The forest was empty. Flash. The trees were leaning in the wind. Flash. There was someone standing there. My heart didn't just skip a beat. It felt like it stopped entirely. I leaned into the screen, my nose almost touching the glass. I waited for the next bolt of lightning. Flash. He was there. A tall, thin silhouette standing perfectly still on the other side of the high-voltage fence. No raincoat, no umbrella. Just a dark shape with a head tilted at an unnatural angle. He was staring directly into the camera. Not at the building, not at the gate. At the lens. At me. I grabbed the radio. Security to perimeter north. We have a trespasser. Identify yourself. Static. Only the sound of the rain. I told myself it was a hiker. A lost camper. But hikers don't stand in a torrential thunderstorm without moving a muscle. I watched the monitor, waiting for the next flash. When the lightning struck again, the space was empty. The figure was gone. Great, I whispered to the empty room. Just my imagination. But then monitor 9, the one covering the rear loading dock, went black. Then monitor 10, then 11. One by one, the no signal message started popping up like a row of falling dominoes. Someone was moving around the building, systematically ripping the cameras off their mounts. I reached for the landline to call the local sheriff, but the line was dead. I checked my cell. No service. The storm must have knocked out the relay tower, or someone had cut the lines. Suddenly, a loud chime echoed through the silent lobby. It was the sound of the HID card reader. My blood turned to ice. On the main console, a text box appeared. Access granted. Sector A1. Keycard 0402. 0402 was the master code. Only 3 people had that code. 2 were in DC, and the third was the facility director, who I knew for a fact was on vacation in Hawaii. Someone hadn't broken in. Someone had been invited in. The power didn't just flicker. It died. The hum of the ventilation system cut out, leaving a silence so profound it felt like I'd gone deaf. Then the red emergency lights kicked in, casting long, bleeding shadows across the brutalist concrete walls. I didn't stay in the kiosk. That was a glass box, a coffin. I grabbed my heavy mag light and my radio, though it was useless now. I knew the layout of the Obsidian Arch better than anyone. I headed for the emergency stairs, my boots thudding softly on the linoleum. I heard it then, the elevator. Ding. The mechanical whir of the doors opening on the floor above me. Someone was taking their time. They weren't rushing. They were exploring. I slipped into the stairwell and began to climb. I needed to get to the roof. The roof had a separate satellite emergency beacon. If I could reach it, I could signal for help. But as I reached the 4th floor landing, I heard a sound that made me stop breathing. Click. The sound of a tactical flashlight being toggled. A beam of light cut through the gap in the stairs from the floor below. He was behind me, and he was climbing. I didn't use my light. I navigated by memory, my hands sliding along the cold metal railing. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. I reached the 6th floor, the top floor. The door was heavy steel. I pushed it open as quietly as possible, but the hinges gave a faint, rhythmic groan. I ducked inside and looked for a place, any place, to hide. The 6th floor was an open-plan lab filled with tall server racks and draped plastic sheeting. I slid behind a row of servers, pressing my back against the cold metal. I heard the stairwell door open, slap, slap, slap. The sound of wet boots on concrete. He was in the room with me. I could hear his breathing, heavy, ragged, like someone struggling for air. He began to drag something metallic across the floor. A pipe? A blade? "I know you're in here, Maya," a voice whispered. It wasn't a voice I recognized. It was low, distorted, like a throat full of gravel. I realized then that he hadn't just used a code. He knew my name. I saw the beam of his flashlight sweeping over the plastic sheets, turning them into glowing ghosts. He was 10 feet away, 5 feet. I saw an opportunity. A heavy janitor's cart was parked near the service elevator. With a burst of adrenaline, I reached out and shoved it with all my might toward the far end of the lab. It crashed into a stack of empty crates with a deafening roar. The intruder bolted toward the noise. I didn't wait. I ran for the stairs, not caring about the noise anymore. I flew down the steps, 3 at a time, my lungs burning. I reached the lobby, burst through the front doors into the freezing rain, and scrambled into my car. My hands were shaking so violently I dropped the keys twice. Finally, the engine roared to life. I didn't look back. I drove through the gate, ignoring the screech of metal as I grazed the post. When the police arrived 2 hours later, they found the building empty. No intruder, no signs of a struggle. But they did find 2 things. First, the master keycard, 0402, was sitting on my security desk, neatly snapped in half. And second, on the 6th floor stairwell, they found a loaded 9mm handgun with the safety off. I never went back for my last paycheck. I moved states that weekend because the police also told me something they couldn't explain. The security footage from the backup server showed the intruder entering the building, but it never showed him leaving. To this day, I wonder if someone is still living inside the walls of the Obsidian Arch, waiting for the next night shift to begin. There are different kinds of fear. There is the loud, crashing fear of a car accident, and then there is the quiet, creeping fear that something is fundamentally wrong with the reality you are looking at. My name is Elena, and my story belongs to the second category. It happened during my junior year of college when I took a night security job at the Glass Spire, a massive corporate plaza in downtown Jersey City. I took the job because it was supposed to be easy. 8 hours of sitting in a marble lobby, surrounded by glass and silence, with nothing to do but study for my exams and occasionally walk through the building to prove I hadn't fallen asleep. The Glass Spire is a beautiful building, all chrome and floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the Hudson River. But at night, all that glass becomes a mirror. You don't see the city anymore. You just see yourself, over and over, reflected in the dark. It was a Tuesday in mid-February. A bitter cold had settled over the city, the kind of cold that makes the air feel like it's made of needles. The building was empty. The bankers, the lawyers, and the tech consultants had all gone home by 7 p.m. By midnight, I was the only soul left in the 40-story tower. Or so I thought. I was sitting at the high security desk, my textbook spread out in front of me, when I glanced up at the monitor wall. The Spire has a multi-level underground parking garage, designated G1 through G4. G3 is usually empty on weeknights. It's a vast concrete cavern with fluorescent lights that have a tendency to hum and flicker. On monitor 12, I saw him. At first, I thought it was a shadow, but then the shadow moved. It was a man wearing a heavy, tattered trench coat that looked several sizes too large for him. He was tall, but he walked with a strange, jerky gait. He wasn't walking toward the elevators or toward a car. He was walking in a perfect straight line along the white paint that marked the parking spots. When he reached the end of a line, he would stop, pivot 90 degrees with military precision, and begin walking the next line. He was tracing the grid of the garage like he was solving a puzzle. I picked up the intercom. "This is security. The garage is for authorized personnel only. Please return to your vehicle and exit the premises." The man didn't react. He didn't even flinch. He just kept walking that white line. I watched him for 5 minutes. His movements were rhythmic, hypnotic, and deeply unsettling. I knew I had to go down there. It was protocol. I grabbed my belt, checked my flashlight, and headed for the service elevator. The ride down to G3 felt longer than usual. The elevator at the glass spire is lined with mirrors. Everywhere I looked, I saw my own nervous expression, my uniform looking a little too big on my shoulders. When the doors opened, the cold hit me instantly. The garage was freezing, much colder than it should have been. "Hello?" I called out. My voice echoed against the concrete, bouncing back at me from the dark corners. "Security, is someone here?" Nothing. I walked to the area where I had seen the man on the monitor. It was empty. I scanned the rows of cars, mostly luxury sedans belonging to the executives who lived nearby. No one was hiding behind them. No one was in the stairwell. I even checked the drainage grates. The man had vanished. I felt a surge of relief. "Just a glitch," I muttered to myself. "A trick of the light on a grainy monitor." I went back to the lobby. But as I stepped out of the elevator, my heart dropped into my stomach. The lobby was warm, centrally heated to a perfect 72 degrees. But there, on the polished white marble floor leading away from the elevator I had just exited, were footprints. Wet, dark footprints. I knelt down to look at them, and a chill that had nothing to do with the weather ran down my spine. They weren't from boots or sneakers. They were the prints of bare feet, large, wide, human feet, and they were soaking wet, as if whoever made them had just stepped out of a river. The footprints led from the elevator, across the lobby, and stopped directly behind my security desk. I stood up, my hand shaking as I reached for my radio. I was looking at the desk from 20 feet away. My textbooks were still there. My coffee was still steaming. But my chair was slowly spinning. "Who's here?" I screamed. My voice cracked. I ran behind the desk and checked the monitors. I frantically scrolled back the footage from the lobby camera. I watched myself leave for the garage. Then I fast-forwarded. 3 minutes later, the elevator doors opened, but no one stepped out. The doors just stayed open for 30 seconds, then closed. And yet, in the footage, I could see the wet footprints appearing on the floor, one by one, as if an invisible person was walking across the lobby. I looked down at the floor again. The physical prints were there. I could smell them now. They smelled like stagnant water, like a pond that hadn't moved in years. I followed the trail. They didn't stop at the desk. They continued past the elevators and toward the north stairwell, the one that leads to the upper office floors. I knew I should leave. I should have run out the front doors and never looked back. But I was 20 years old and terrified of losing my job. I thought maybe it was a prank. Maybe the senior guards were testing me. I entered the north stairwell. The air here was heavy. I began to climb. I didn't use the stairs. I used the shadows, moving as quietly as I could. On the 4th floor, I heard it. Slap, slap, slap. The sound of wet skin hitting a hard surface. It was coming from the floor above me. I climbed higher, my breath coming in short, jagged gasps. I reached the 5th floor and peeked through the small glass window in the door. The 5th floor was an open concept office for a marketing firm. It was full of glass partitions and designer furniture. The moon was bright outside, casting a pale silver light across the room. He was there. The man in the trench coat was standing in the center of the room. He had taken the coat off. Underneath, he was wearing nothing but tattered gray rags. He was deathly pale, his skin looking like wet parchment. He was standing in front of a glass partition, staring at his own reflection. But he wasn't just staring. He was pressing his face against the glass. He was licking it. Slowly, rhythmically, his tongue was moving up and down the glass, leaving a trail of gray moisture. I accidentally let the stairwell door click. The man froze. He didn't turn around. He stayed pressed against the glass, but the reflection's eyes shifted. In the glass, his eyes found mine. They were wide, yellowed, and completely devoid of pupils. He let out a sound, a low, wet gurgle that sounded like someone drowning. Then he turned. He didn't run. He lunged. He moved with a horrifying spider-like agility, his bare feet slapping against the carpet. I turned and bolted down the stairs. I didn't care about being quiet. I crashed through the doors, my heavy boots thudding. I could hear him behind me. He was faster. Every time I rounded a landing, I could hear those wet feet hitting the concrete just a flight above me. I didn't go back to the lobby. I knew he'd corner me there. I ran into the G1 level of the garage and dived under a massive black SUV. I pressed my face into the oil-stained concrete and held my breath. I saw the bare feet appear at the stairwell door. They were gray, wrinkled, and dripping. He stood there for what felt like an eternity. He was sniffing the air. He made that gurgling sound again, a wet, rattling noise in the back of his throat. Then he started to walk. Not toward me, but toward the white lines. He began tracing the grid again. Slap, pivot, slap. I waited until he was at the far end of the level. I slid out from under the car, ran to the exit ramp, and didn't stop until I saw the blue lights of a police cruiser parked at a nearby 7-Eleven. The police searched the glass spire from the roof to the basement. They found the trench coat on the 5th floor. They found the wet footprints in the lobby. They even found the moisture on the glass partition. But they never found the man. The security footage from that night was the strangest part. The cameras in the garage showed the man clearly. But the cameras in the hallways and the office floors, they only showed doors opening and closing by themselves. They showed the carpet depressing under an invisible weight. To the digital eyes of the building, the man didn't exist. I quit the next day. I moved back home and took a job at a flower shop. It's bright, it's colorful, and there are no mirrors. But sometimes, when it rains and I hear the sound of water dripping on a hard floor, I freeze. I look at the ground, terrified that I'll see a wet, bare footprint appearing out of nowhere, tracing a line directly toward me. The smell of a new building is supposed to be comforting. It smells like progress, fresh white paint, expensive industrial carpet, and that sharp, sterile tang of high-grade antiseptic. But for me, Sarah, that smell will always be associated with the night I realized that some doors are locked for a reason. I was 21, a trainee on my very first week of mobile patrol. My trainer was a man named Marcus. Marcus was a mountain of a man, a 20-year veteran of the force who had retired to the quiet life of private security. He had seen everything, or so he told me. We were assigned to the St. Jude's Wellness Annex, a brand new medical clinic in a semi-rural part of Mississauga. It sat on the edge of a vast, empty field, looking like a glowing glass cube in the middle of nowhere. It was exactly 1:15 a.m. when we pulled our marked security SUV into the gravel parking lot. The plan was simple, a sweep and clear. We check the exterior perimeters, walk every floor, ensure the pharmaceutical storage is locked, and head to the next site. "Stay sharp, rookie," Marcus said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "New buildings are like new shoes. They creak while they're settling in. Don't let the shadows jump at you." But as we stepped out of the car, the air felt wrong. The annex was supposed to be fully locked down by 9 p.m. Yet as our flashlights swept the front facade, we saw it. The massive plate glass front door wasn't just unlocked, it was shattered. But the glass wasn't on the sidewalk. It was sprayed across the lobby floor. Someone hadn't broken in. Someone had smashed their way out. Marcus drew his heavy-duty flashlight like a club. "Stay behind me. Keep your radio keyed, but stay silent." We stepped through the jagged frame. The lobby was hauntingly quiet. The only sound was the rhythmic tick-tock of a designer clock on the wall and the distant mechanical hum of the building's climate control. My heart was a frantic bird trapped in my chest. Then we heard the chime. Ding! In the center of the lobby, the elevator display began to glow. A small red arrow pointed upward. 1, 2, 3, 4. It stopped at the top floor. We stood frozen, watching the numbers. A moment later, it started coming back down. 4, 3, 2, 1. The door slid open with a soft, predatory hiss. The elevator was empty. Marcus frowned, his thick eyebrows knitting together. "Sensor malfunction, maybe, or someone's playing games." He stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the 3rd floor, the floor where the surgical suites and recovery rooms were located. I followed him, my hand hovering near my pepper spray. As the doors closed, the air in the small metal box felt suffocatingly thin. When the doors opened on the 3rd floor, the smell hit us. It wasn't antiseptic anymore. It was something metallic, something copper-like. Blood? No, it was more like old, rusted iron. The 3rd floor was a labyrinth of darkened hallways and frosted glass doors. Marcus clicked on his high-powered mag light, the beam cutting through the darkness like a lightsaber. "Look," I whispered, pointing to the floor. The floor was wet, but it wasn't a spill. Steam was curling up from under the door of the public restroom at the end of the hall. We moved toward it, our footsteps echoing with an agonizing clarity. Marcus kicked the door open. Inside, every single faucet, 6 sinks in total, was turned on to full blast. Nothing but scalding hot water. The room was a thick, blinding fog of white steam. The mirrors were completely opaque with condensation. Marcus reached out to turn off the first tap, but he stopped. Written in the steam on the main mirror, in large, shaky letters, were 3 words. "Is she watching?" My breath hitched. "Marcus, we need to call the police. Now." "I'm already on it," he whispered, reaching for his shoulder mic. But before he could speak, a sound erupted from the ceiling above us. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded like something heavy, was crawling through the air vents directly over our heads. It wasn't the sound of a person crouching. It was a frantic, rhythmic scratching, like claws on galvanized steel. The scratching moved fast. It headed out of the bathroom and down the main corridor toward the surgical wing. "Move," Marcus shouted. We sprinted out of the bathroom. The hallway was a tunnel of shifting shadows. We reached the heavy double doors of the surgery wing just in time to see the vent cover at the end of the hall fall to the floor with a deafening clang. A figure was dropping out of the ceiling. It wasn't a man, at least not a man I recognized as human. It was dressed in a tattered hospital gown, but its limbs were too long, its movements too fluid. It landed on all 4s, its head snapping toward us with a sickening, wet crack of bone. Marcus aimed his light directly at it. "Security! Get on the ground, now!" The figure didn't flinch. In the harsh glare of the LED, I saw its face, or rather, the lack of one. Its skin was stretched tight over its skull, like wet leather, and its eyes were nothing but dark, hollow pits. It opened its mouth, and instead of a scream, a sound came out that I still hear in my nightmares. It was the sound of a woman's voice, perfectly clear, perfectly calm. It sounded like the building's automated greeting system. "Welcome to St. Jude's. How can we help you today?" Then it bolted. It didn't run away from us. It ran at us. It scrambled along the walls, defying gravity, its fingers digging into the drywall. Marcus shoved me into an alcove and stood his ground, but the thing didn't strike. It leaped over him, its gown brushing against his shoulder, and dived through the open elevator doors we had left behind. The doors hissed shut. We watched the display. 1G. We ran for the stairs, the adrenaline making my vision tunnel. By the time we burst into the lobby, the front of the building was a sea of blue and red lights. 2 Mississauga police cruisers had arrived, called by the silent alarm Marcus had tripped earlier. The officers were standing by the shattered front door, their weapons drawn. "Did you see him?" Marcus roared, gasping for air. "A man in a gown. He just came down the elevator." The lead officer, a veteran sergeant, looked at us like we were insane. "Nobody came out of this building, Marcus. We've been staring at this door since we pulled up. The elevator hasn't moved." "Check the cameras," I yelled. "Please, just check the cameras." We went to the server room with the police. We pulled up the feed for the 3rd floor hallway. We saw ourselves, Marcus and I, standing in the hallway. We saw the vent cover fall. We saw Marcus draw his flashlight and shout commands at the empty air. In the video, there was no creature. There was no figure in a gown. There was only Marcus and me, reacting to something that wasn't there, until the very end. The sergeant paused the frame just as we ran for the stairs. In the corner of the screen, reflected in a glass trophy case, you could clearly see the reflection of a woman in a white dress standing directly behind me. She was leaning over my shoulder, her mouth inches from my ear. She wasn't on the camera feed. She was only in the reflection. The police never found anyone. They chalked it up to a hallucinatory episode caused by a chemical leak, citing a faulty pipe in the basement. But they couldn't explain the writing in the steam. They couldn't explain the 6 hot taps being turned on. And they certainly couldn't explain why. When I got home that morning and looked in my own bathroom mirror, I saw the faint, damp outline of a handprint on the back of my security jacket. I didn't go back for my second week of training. I told Marcus I wasn't cut out for the quiet life. Sometimes, when I'm in a modern building and I hear the chime of an elevator, I don't get on. I wait. I watch the doors close. Because I know that just because you can't see something on a monitor doesn't mean it isn't standing right behind you, waiting for the doors to open.